Hello, everybody. You're very welcome to the latest Radio Centre Ireland webinar. And today we are looking at a very dynamic and highly debated area, the attention economy. When you look at traditional measurement systems have been scrutinized, and there's a move towards using attention as perhaps a more meaningful way. It's kind of an emerging metric in terms of really understanding consumer engagement. And from campaign planning to media to creative, there are sectors really reevaluating attention to see, is it a more human focused way of really assessing performance. There is a huge debate around attention. It's a hugely debatable area, particularly when it comes to audio, actually, because when you think about audio and passive listening, it's often misunderstood and often undervalued. If you think from a visual point of view, if you're not looking, it can't be seen. But if you're not listening, you can still hear. So there's always the opportunity to hear in terms of passive listening. And I think in a world that's saturated by visual content, audio is really moving as a dynamic medium that can really engage with consumers in the way the visual alone can't. So it's a really fascinating area, and I am thrilled and delighted today to introduce and welcome Mike Follett, who's the CEO of Lumen Research. And Mike is a world authority on attention. And Mike has spent all his career looking at communications and how to make them effective. I think, Mike, you started many, many years ago working for BMP DDB, which is I think the start of account planning.
That's
And
correct.
Mike since moved on and managed strategic planning teams in New York, Mumbai. And Mike has also completed an MBA in the Imperial College in London, and then decided to set up Lumen Research. And I think you've said this yourself, Mike. I think one of the quotes that made you really think about setting up the company you now run is you said, anybody can have an opinion, but decisions based on data tend to be the best decisions. And
Exactly.
Lumen Research is now world renowned and uses cutting edge technology to allow brands to really evaluate intention and how it develops and works towards their business and campaign objectives. So we're really thrilled to have you. And now I will hand over to Mike, who's really going to talk about attention, talk about how attention works, and talk about the implications of attentions for brands, and indeed quite interesting how Ireland has played a key role in how we really understand attention. Because before Mike starts, just to say the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, please enter in any question that you want, and I will answer those or ask those questions on behalf of you at the end. But for now, I want to hand over to Mike. Over to you, Mike.
Thanks very much, Kieran. So it's very nice to see you all, guys, or be here, and thank you for the invitation. Um, this is frankly pandering to an Irish audience. I try to desperately find an Irish angle to be particularly relevant here. But the relevance really comes from the summer of 2016, when this man ruined my country and took us out of the EU. And it was in that summer that I felt a real change happening in my life. And I realised that deep down I was Irish. I think my dad, who was born in England, always has his suspicions, but it was really my mum, who was born in Armagh, who knew. And so through my mum, fantastically, I've been able to take up Irish citizenship. But in doing so, I've become felt a lot more, done a lot more thinking about the way in which Irish science and Irish philosophy has underpinned an awful lot of what we think about on the attention economy today. And so I've tried to come up with sort of three ideas that we're going to talk about here that are all based on different aspects of great Irish thinkers. The first thing I want to talk about is the fundamental insight about the attention economy. about what it is. And really, the leading thinker here is George Berkeley, Bishop Berkeley, there, who we'll talk about in a second. He's obviously the person who Berkeley University over in California is named after. But his insight as to what attention is underpins everything, and basically the world is catching up to Berkeley's thought from almost 250 years ago. The second thing that we're going to talk about is a method, a way of measuring and thinking about the future, and thinking about how we can use what we do know to explain what we don't. And this inductive inferential method of science, which is right at the heart of what we do at Lumen, was obviously sort of essentially invented by Robert Boyle from his castle in County Waterford. And then the final thing that we'll talk about isn't just about the insight and the method, but also an ethic of attention. And we'll finish on that because I would like to get your opinions, because this again is an area where Irish philosophy is decades in advance of what the rest of the English speaking world is considering. And Iris Murdoch, who was born in Dublin, has some really interesting things to say about the implications of some of the insights that we'll talk about. So let's start with the insight. What is attention? Well, Berkeley, a famous philosopher, one of the things, his sort of slogan is esse est percipi, which means being is perceiving, or perceiving is being. Things don't really exist unless you see them. And you might remember it was Berkeley who came up with the famous idea of if a tree falls in the forest and no one is there to hear it, does it make a noise? And this really was a very inspirational thing when we started at Lumen, because just because people have the chance to see something, or the opportunity to see the OTS or the OTH, the opportunity to hear, does that mean that they will in fact look at it? What's the difference between the potential to see something and the action? Now, in advertising, we always assume that just because you buy an impression, you have made an impression. But this is not the case. This is not true. That's something a lie that we tell ourselves. And up until around about 2010, it was just a lie that we had to accept. We knew it was wrong, but we didn't have the technical abilities to do anything about it. But then, as eye tracking and behavioral measurement got better and better, we could start filling in the pieces there, and not just talk about trees in the jungle falling down, but also ads in the urban jungle. Just because people have the opportunity to see something, if no one looks, does that ad really exist? And that was the question that we set ourselves in response to the challenge that Berkeley had laid down 200 years ago. When we think about attention, what we have to realize is that we have to go from the opportunity to see whether something at the top of the funnel, impressions that are delivered to the screen, and if they are sort of technically viewable or not. But we have to move quickly beyond the possibility or the opportunity to see things to actually measure, did anyone look or did anyone listen? And if they did listen, how long did they look at that for? And that really is the essence of the debate about the attention economy here. We live in a world where we have essentially infinite ads. If you look at crazy numbers that come out of programmatic advertising, we are allegedly served hundreds, thousands of ads a day. And if we pay attention to all of those things, we wouldn't have time to have breakfast or brush our teeth, or we'd have to be awake 24 hours a day looking at ads to consume all the ads that were meant to be served. So there's obviously something wrong with our understanding of the attention economy at the moment, because just because we've got the opportunity to see lots of things, and we've got an opportunity to see infinite amounts of ads. Our brains are very much finite, and we do not look at everything, and we do not engage with everything. And understanding the difference between the could be and the is really really important. Another famous philosopher, not Irish in this case, but Herb Simon, the Nobel Prize winner and the teacher of Daniel Kahneman of Thinking Fast and Slow fame, once said that a wealth of information presupposes a poverty of attention. That just because you've got lots of things there doesn't mean that everything will get looked at. And the scarce resource here isn't the number of ads, it's the amount of attention that we've got. So this is a deep insight that started with Berkeley, but led on to the founding of Lumen. But we didn't, just to talk about what we mean here. Here is some data which Kieran will share afterwards of the viewability levels of different ads across different media that Lumen has collected data on. We don't have radio data here, but we'll come on to that in a second. And here you can see there's TV and YouTube and InStream and TikTok and all of those things. You might be surprised to note that not even TV ads are 100% viewable, that they reach the screen, and that's because sometimes people fall asleep or they go out to make a cup of tea. The ads reach the screen, but as Barclay would say, if no one's there to look at them, they're certainly not going to make a noise. So this is the viewability levels. But what's particularly interesting is that you can have a look at how many people actually looked at these things. And there's a big difference, because even if the TV is on and the ad is playing and you're in the room, that doesn't necessarily mean you always look at the ad. In actual fact, only about 43% of TV ads get looked at. Perhaps 52% of pre-roll ads, and 53% of TikTok ads. Sometimes you have situations where even if the ads are not, only 30% of the ads are viewable, 46% of them get looked at. And that's because you can look at some things even if they don't reach the technical viewability standards. As you're going through Facebook, you can be scrolling very, very quickly and your eye can alight on an ad even if it's not technically viewable by MRC standards. But we see what happens when this happens, because the second thing is how long people look at the ads for. And this is where TV starts to stretch its legs a bit and show the value of those sorts of media. Because even if not all the ads are getting looked at, when they do get looked at, they get looked at for a very, very long time relative to other media. Now, that means that we can measure the chance of an ad being noticed, but also how long it gets noticed for. That's two numbers, which is often one number too many. So what we do is we combine those numbers to give us, if you were to buy 1,000 impressions, 1,000 ads, and perhaps say 60% of those get looked at, so six and 10 or 600 of your 1,000 get looked at, and they all get looked at for 10 seconds, then you say that's sort of 6,000 seconds of attention per 1,000 impressions. And that's what we've done here. We've tried to have one number that links to 1,000 impressions. And you can see here that TV and YouTube, for different reasons, are doing well. YouTube is almost unmissable, but doesn't necessarily get lots of attention for a very long time. TV, people are mucking about in their phones or, in and out of the room, maybe. But when they do look at it, they look at the ads for a bit longer. Now, the reason why this is so important is you can link the APM, the attention per thousand, to a CPM to, we'll come on to that in a second. Don't worry, I'll come on to that bit in a bit. So that's the reality of attention and differences between media. But we have to go and collect lots of data and then use probabilistic models to model out the effects of media in different directions and under different circumstances. And this is this inferential approach, this probabilistic approach, to the mathematics that we use was really brought to life by Robert Boyle, again about 250, 275 years ago. In his famous book, The Skeptical Chemist, he said, "I do not pretend to demonstrate, but only show the probable cause for the belief I propose." So rather than requiring every single experiment to be absolutely perfect, he championed the idea of doing lots of experiments and taking an average from that, or learning what we know in one area and then applying that probabilistically to another. It's the basis of all modern science, this inferential inductive method, and it is the product of Irish scientists. And it's something that we've definitely approached as well, because you saw before, we have all of these sort of attentive seconds per thousand impressions for all these visual media. But we were approached by the radio industry in the States and the UK to try and say, well, how will we do this for audio stuff? And here, this presented a real problem for us because we are an eye tracking company. We've developed a whole load of technology that turns this webcam here into an eye tracking device. That's great for visual information, but there's no such thing as ear tracking. So even if there are the little hairs inside your ear, if one quivers and the other one doesn't, it's very difficult to know if that means attention or not. So what we did is we tried to use what we knew about visual attention to infer what might be happening for audio attention. And we did enormous great studies in the US and the UK, where we knew for visual media how viewable these things were, and then when we did the tests, we worked out if anyone looked at the ads and how long they looked at them for, and then we could use this data here, how viewable they were and the time to work and the attention to work out how much attention do you need to get people to remember an ad or to change their opinion about a brand. And we've done that hundreds of times for all of these visual media. For audio media, we realized that if we knew the audio time, the audibility, if people could hear it or not, and how long they could hear it for, and if we knew the brand recall and the brand choice statistics, then we could sort of guess the attention equivalence or the attention time equivalence, and estimate how much audio attention must be happening as a result. Now, this sort of inference is exactly the sort of thing that Boyle used when he was proving the existence of the vacuum. He's famous for everyone said that vacuums couldn't exist, and of course it's very difficult to prove that something isn't there. But his famous work that the whole world is enthused about, the proof that vacuums exist, used exactly this kind of thinking, and so we're heirs to Boyle in that sense. We found when we did this that we could accurately predict attention on the basis of if we knew what the exposure time was, the brand recall and the choice uplift, and if we knew if people had the opportunity to skip an ad or if they were forced to listen to it, and the passive attention that Kieran was talking about, we could enter those factors in the model. And then we could estimate attention. And you can see why Kieran has invited me along to speak to you today, because we conclusively proved that audio attention equivalents are very, very high. That for your 1,000 impressions, you might generate more attention than a typical TV ad. Such as the strength of the audible time, the length of the audible time in comparison to an ad flitting by on Facebook, and such is the sort of the passive power of that things really must be happening in people's heads when radio or podcast or streaming ads are played. And this is really important because, like I said, you can link this attention per thousand data to cost data to work out what's the true cost of things. And we can see here that radio ads, or podcast ads, streaming ads might seem a little bit expensive sometimes. I don't know if we've got any media buyers here, but you might be having a go at Kieran, going, "Well, I'd buy more radio if it was a bit cheaper." It's certainly more expensive than digital display ads that are sort of 10 a penny. Perhaps if you just were following the costs of things, just the CPM, you might spend more money on desktop display or on social than you would, because they do seem cheap. But when you bring in this idea of attention, of the fact that not just the impression bought, but the impression made, you can see that in actual fact, the cost of attention across these different media is radically different. These digital display ads that look quite cheap are very, very easy to ignore, and so therefore there's a very high cost to be paid for low price media. Similarly, though, the radio and podcast and streaming ads that might have seemed a little bit expensive, because they're generating so much attention, the cost of attention is really, really great there. Now, people aren't just interested in the price of media, and it's what you get out at the other end. And so we've also been doing lots and lots of work to show the relationship between attention and outcomes. And we've found consistently that more attention leads to better outcomes. Recent work we've done with Havas, looking at the impact of digital display media, shows that ads that get more attention, or even clumps of ads, perhaps one, two, three, four, five ads over the course of a week, that all add up to quite a lot of attention. They are the ones that have the biggest changes, drive the biggest changes in awareness, consideration, preference, and action. And next week we're going to actually. Yes, next week we're going to be speaking about a cut of this data that is specifically about newspaper advertising, digital display ads on newspaper websites, where the strength that websites outperform all other media. All other digital media, sorry, and the strength of those curves is even greater for high quality news brands there. It isn't just about memory, it's also about money. We've conclusively proven as well that performance metrics improve dramatically. Just because ads are viewable doesn't mean that anyone's going to click on them or act on them afterwards. But we know that if we apply this data to those apply these models to the data, we can show that the ads that we think are getting the most attention are also the ones that are driving the biggest clicks. But it isn't just about memory and money there. It's also about profit. We're all in business to make profit. And so the final sort of proof of the pudding here is a really exciting piece of work we did with Group M and Ubiquity, the big media auditors, where we analysed 144 econometric models to try and understand which of the different media in all of those different models were driving the greatest increases in incremental profit. And conclusively, they said, "Oh well, cinema, 1,000 ads in cinema will generate more profit than 1,000 ads in TV or in social or what have you." And then we applied our attention data to that. And what was astonishing, ladies and gents, is that there's an almost one-to-one connection between increases in attention and increases in profit. Not just in memory, not just in sales, but actual profit. What the analysis with Ubiquity showed is, and I don't know if you can see this in the top right-hand corner of the third chart, the R squared there, the statistical correlation there is at 0.979. That means that a 1% change in attention drives a 0.979% change in profit. It's total correlation, which is very, very unusual to see, that this attention stuff is the thing that drives profit. Now, we didn't have any radio data in here, but if you remember from the previous slides, we imagined that most radio ads get around about 10,000 sorry, rather, 1,000 radio ads will generate around about 10,000 seconds of attention time. And Des, if you could just point to the 10,000, let's read up here. So from 10,000 up to the blue line, that's sort of suggesting that the profit generated from 1,000 radio ads should be on a par with the profit that is generated from 1,000 TV ads for the price you pay for those ads. So we find that very, very interesting, and we now work with all the major agencies and many big blue chip companies to apply this data to their planning and their buying, and then use the algorithms that were generated not just to use as a measurement tool, but also to go and buy better media. We work with SSPs and with DSPs to create PMPs of collections of high quality media where you can go and buy that in real time using programmatic tools, so that you just buy the good stuff and avoid the bad stuff, or even just to buy stuff that's right for you, because some brands need some levels of attention, other brands have different objectives and will need different levels of attention. While attention is always important, there are nuances for different brands, and that's what we do. But the final thing to say, and this is where I'll conclude, isn't just about business, but is about society as a whole. We've shown that more attention is a better thing, and it leads to better recall, better results in the short term, and better profit in the long term. And so you might think, and we've also shown that it's the media that have high quality content on it that seem to do best. There's this virtuous circle of spending money to, sorry, filmmakers make great films. You go to the cinema and you're exposed to ads, but you really pay attention to them because you're very, engaged with the cinema, and therefore you remember the ads and you act on them. TV program makers make amazing programs, and the ads that support those programs are very, very effective. Podcasters make great podcasts, and because you're engaged with the podcast, you stick around for the ads and so on. And you might think that this means that you can do well by doing good. We can support the newspapers and the filmmakers that we love for to protect democracy and to enliven life. And capitalism makes it easy for us here. But there's a challenge here, because, and this comes from a thinker like Murdoch, which is that when she talks about attention, she talks about it as a choice, a moral choice. The direction of attention is contrary to nature, contrary to that sort of doing well by doing good thing. She's saying, no, it's outward, away from self, which reduces all to a false unity, towards the great surprising variety of the world. And the ability to so direct attention is love. And this is quite a profound place to stop, because it reminds us that, yes, all the data I've shown you at the moment suggests that you can do well by doing good. You can support journalists, you can support filmmakers, and get better results for your clients by putting money into TV and radio and cinema and quality newspapers. But there might become a time when the user-generated content platforms reduce their prices so much that it might be economically sensible just to stop putting money where you get good levels of attention, because it's so cheap to buy little flickers of attention you get elsewhere. And there might become a time when you do well by doing bad. And the people on this call have a moral choice. And again, I think it's interesting that this is something that Irish philosophers have grappled with for many, many years. The ethics of attention. And Iris Murdoch was talking about this in the 70s. And it's only now that the rest of the English-speaking world is catching up with philosophers from Ireland who have been way ahead of the game. Just as Berkeley had the insight about the nature of attention, and does something even exist if you don't attend to it? Just as Boyle gave us the tools to measure these things, so it's another Irish philosopher who's been able to set the terms for the coming debate about the ethics of attention. And that's where we'll leave it. We'll leave it with a question to you, which is, as I said, at the moment, advertisers have an easy choice. Put your money where you get the best attention. And that just happens to be where you have the most professional content produced. There is a very strong relationship there, and you will make more money by supporting real content and real journalism. But there may come a time when that's not the case, and then we have a real ethical dilemma, and perhaps we ought to consult Iris Murdoch then. Thank you very much, guys. For that, I'm here to answer any questions, and thank you for your attention.
That was fantastic, Mike. Super presentation and very provocative, particularly towards the end. And there's loads of questions in the Q&A button. But before I get to them, I'm going to start with a few questions of my own, if that's okay. The first one is Robert Heath and his famous book, The Hidden Power of Advertising, and his view that, well, maybe I'm paraphrasing, but about
The low attention
process.
processing model, yeah.
Yeah, very effective at low processing, and that way can exert a powerful, say, subconscious emotional influence. How do you marry that thinking with the work you're doing, or do you agree with him or disagree, or what's the? I noticed there's a lot of debates around this area, so just
There is.
great to
It's
get
an
your.
important thing. The short answer is I think it's bullshit.
Okay.
That's a technical phrase there. Um, it's interesting. One of the things I learned when I went and did my MBA, I did history at university, so I'm not a scientist by training, but I went and did an MBA at Imperial College London amongst scientists. And we recruited lots of Lumen. Lumen comes out of Imperial with a whole load of scientists. And what's amazing about dealing with scientists is that they're very well educated and they really know about their stuff there. So hiring a whole load of psychologists means that you get a main line into the actual science of attention. The key thinkers that we should be consulting here are people like Michael Posner, J.J. Gibson, R.L. Gregory, and crucially, a man called Carl Friston, who's the world's most cited neuroscientist. And none of these people have any time for the low involvement processing model, which really comes out of a really weird niche a bit of psychology developed by the US Air Force in the 60s, a man called Herb Krugman. Now, in advertising, because we don't know what good science is, we end up accepting any old crap. So what we find is that the mainstream psychology has an idea of selective attention and conscious engagement as necessary for memory formation. While there might be some weird things on the side, and I don't want to discount it entirely because the brain is a very, very complicated thing, most of that low involvement processing stuff, we should admit, is just really niche. It's really weird. When you're thinking about when proper sort of attention science, the more active engagement stuff that we've been talking about here is, and we know that's the case because it's the sort of stuff that I've been talking about here that fits with the cameras that are inside the Oculus VR headset. And we can talk about foveated rendering and things. It's not an opinion. This is the thing that actually powers all that VR stuff. It's also the conceptual thoughts about active attention and memory formation, which is powering Elon Musk's Neuralink thing. And finally, it's the stuff that the EU uses for their attentiveness studies and the eye tracking that can you can get in things again like Tesla cars or Volvo trucks that monitor if people are attending to the road while they're driving. So hard science, proper science is is that mainstream science. Our stuff conforms to that. The Robert Heath stuff, which I don't want to discount entirely, but we have to admit is a really niche, odd little bit that perhaps I used to believe before I started getting into.
Okay. And a kind of related question. There's also another school of thought that says, attention is kind of the middleman. But I know you talked about it during your presentation. The outcomes are what's key. Sales, brand,
Absolutely.
obviously aware.
No one advertises to get attention. You advertise to get money or yeah.
Yeah, sales, consideration, purchase intent. So, what's the view of some people I've heard saying, well, why we mention the middleman? Let's just concentrate on the output, and why spend so
Well, I
much
think
time
that
in the middle?
that's certainly the case. This is just part of the story, and it's
Yeah.
an ingredient within a broader whole here. The uh, uh, but it's an important ingredient because that broader whole is very difficult to unpick. And the
Mm,
crucial thing that's very difficult to unpick, one of the crucial things, is how much of the result am I seeing because of the creative, and how much of the result am I seeing because of the media. If we lived in a world where you just lived and died by how many sales you make, and you as a newspaper owner or as a radio station would go, don't worry, just help us, give us the stuff, and we'll just make you money. What happens if the advertiser gives you a dog of a creative? What happens if the ad is really, really crap? Is it fair that, or what happens if the product is bad? Um, uh, 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 or what happens if your product is a vote or a shift in perception rather than a sale? What's really important is to be able to disaggregate those things, to say some of the performance that we're talking about here is delivered because I put ads on a good website or on a good radio station or whatever. Some of it is down to the fact that the ad was really creative or memorable or whatever. Some of it because the offer was really good and so on. This data is part of that story, but it's an important part because it helps us specifically understand the contribution of media and the contribution of creative.
okay. And just a related point, do you see as an objective for the industry that, you have attention metrics integrated into media plans? I know there's,
That's right.
yeah.
All the big agencies use our data to some extent. So Dentsu have a planning tool called CCS, and our stuff is there. Havas have one called MMP, Meaningful Media Planner. Our data's in there. WPP have one called Choreograph. So many of the people on this call are probably benefiting from Lumen's data already. And if you're a brand owner on the call, ask whether there's Lumen data in your agency planning tools. It will be there. It might not be always being used, but it is there. So it's used at the planning stage. It can also be used at the measurement stage. So I bought all these ads, how much attention did I get here, and do all of those sort of graphs that I showed you, but not just for media in general, but for brand A versus brand B or something. So that's already available. But often the planning stuff is too early, the measurement stuff is too late. What clients and agencies really, really want is to be able to have some information right now. If you know that ads on website A are always better than website B, well, why don't buy both and then be told later that you wasted your money here or there? Why don't you just use this to programmatically direct investment towards the good stuff? And so our buying tools are used everywhere. We have deep integrations with people like the Trade Desk, or who obviously have a deep integration with Spotify. So you can use this programmatically, um, not just to buy visual media, but also audio media, um, and also with Amazon. And of course, the link with Amazon's DSP is really, really exciting because not only can you direct investment, but you don't have to hang around. You can work out if it led to a sale on Amazon.ie the next day. So
And
planning's there. You can do it more of it. Um, Measurements there. We have, we measure stuff. We also work with Double Verify and IAS to power their attention tools. But the really exciting thing is the action, the doing of it, and that's where we make most of our money.
and it's like it's that's really interesting again, and it's great that you talked about, initially, you had eye tracking technology, then you've migrated to audio tracking technology, explained how that worked, which is fantastic. I presume there's a journey to continue to measure audio, and then within that, are you having any conversations with some of the global radio broadcasters like iHeart or Bearer or Global in terms of connecting with their systems?
Well, iHeart and Westwood One
Yeah.
and Odyssey paid for that audio study, or contributed to the payment. It was a Dentsu plus Westwood One study. All of that data is available. I think there's going to be an article about this talk in AdWorld later in the week, and the links to all this research and all of the outcomes research are embedded as links in that article. So go and search that out. Everyone will have that. But I think that we're definitely on a journey. There are new and more interesting things coming through. We've got lots and lots of information, for instance, about spot ads, a 30-second TV ad or a 6-second bumper, or whatever it might be. But increasingly, there's an awful lot of activity that is sort of in between advertising and content, all of that influencer stuff that is happening. We are collecting data and building models on that. And audio influencers are also super, super important. One of the reasons why podcast advertising is so powerful is because it's often not a separate ad. It's your friend, the announcer, or the doing the talking, and that can be much, much more powerful than or can be, not always, but can be than a sort of an ad that's produced by an ad agency. And so we're on a journey. We're constantly there are the endless more media to investigate and test, which is one thing. But with totally new modalities, AR and VR and things like that. But there's one final thing about this, Kieran, which is an awful lot of our data is just about what happens when one person is shown one ad. But we know that that's not the case. That Havas stuff I was talking about was about what happens when people are shown 5 or 10 or 15 ads. What happens when I think it's going to be really exciting? What happens when people hear something on the radio as they're driving the kids to school or something like that, and then later in the day they see something on Facebook that is it Facebook that's generated the sale there, or really is Facebook just harvesting the work that was really done by the radio ad earlier in the day or earlier in the week? And so it's the end. There's going to be a whole load more research and more insights generated as we realize how frequency and priming and flighting affect within the media and then between media.
Yeah, that whole issue of attribution is such a key, particularly for broadcast, linear
Absolutely.
radio.
We're at a very exciting time because of the work that we've done here, the basic building blocks. I think we can start putting these things together. And the world of AI allows us to build much more sophisticated predictive models of attention than ever before using this amazing data. And it allows us to add in new and exciting data sets that are outside of this. So, we work with companies like um, Nielsen and InfoSum or Experian to bring in additional data sets to further nuance our models. And I feel like in the last 10 years we've done an amazing work to understand human attention. And you might go, well, what else is there to learn? And then you open the next page and you think, oh God, I haven't got a clue. Bloody hell. This is it's
Well,
it's so rich. There's so many more questions to answer, and that's what's so fun about it.
Well, yeah, that's a good segue into some questions from the attendees. So I've been hogging the questions. So there's loads of questions. So I'll try and get through them as quickly as possible. We have 12 minutes left on the webinar. The first one is, could you explain how in-read video mobile has a greater percentage than its viewability? That's obviously relating to a specific stat on one of the slides you presented.
Yeah, so if you remember, this is what I was trying to say that the viewability statistics you can think of in two ways. One is, did it reach the screen at all? For was there even a pixel on the screen? And the second way of thinking about it is according to the Media Ratings Council, the MRC. Ads are not technically viewable unless they achieve some specific criteria. It's not always the same. So video and static are different, but usually it's 100% of the pixels on screen, all 100% for 1 second or 2 seconds or something like that. Now, not always, but sometimes on things like Facebook you're scrolling on your phone and the ads appear on screen, but they don't. Not all 100% of the pixels are on screen for 1 second, and so the MRC would say that's not a viewable impression. But such as it's an anomaly in the data. You can still look at it,
Yeah.
even if it's not technically speaking viewable. So don't worry, we're not breaking Bishop Berkeley's rules there, but it highlights that we have to be very careful about the language we're using. Things that can be sort of viewable or technically viewable, and neither of those things is the same as viewed.
Gotcha. No, that's clear, very clear. The second question is the slide before this measured in seconds? I'm not sure if you can connect to that question. Maybe is the
Uh,
slide before this measured in seconds? I'm not
well,
sure.
we tend to measure if the chart, whether or not you're going to look at it, yes or no, at all, we give that measure that in percentage terms. So you have a 50% chance of looking at it, or a 60 or a 70. But then, when in terms of how long you look at it for, we try and measure everything in seconds. So if it's zero point 0.6, that's zero point 0.6 of a second. If it's 3.4, it's 3 seconds and zero point 0.4 seconds there. So we try and keep everything consistent there.
Okay.
Uh,
And this is probably related. When measuring a tenth of seconds on radio, is this based on 30-second ads or is it a mixture?
yes. So
Yeah.
in the link in the article in AdWorld, there's a link there that will take you to a whole 50 slides of the Westwood One uh, uh, published report. So I think yes, it's in large part 30 seconds, and of course. Many digital display ads are not 30-second ads, are they? So it's not entirely fair to compare like with like. But who said the world? Even though Lumen's data is consistent across, how people use Lumen's data is not very fair. So I'm sure the radio guys who produced those initial slides put the best light on radio, and it's a very strong media. But equally, you might see other stories from newspapers or TVs or even for Facebook. I was over at Meta last week, and they make lots of use of our data. And I don't want to give you the impression that. We have a thing against Meta at all, because Meta is a wonderful place to advertise under certain conditions and for certain objectives, and at a certain price. And so the key to it for all advertisers is to work out what it is that you're interested in. What really matters to you. Do you want 3 seconds or 5 seconds or 20 seconds to get the job done? And then and then that'll influence things. And then from a media owner perspective is to understand, well, what can we provide? I don't think it's something we work with JC the big poster people, and in a sense, JC are competing with TV and cinema, but only in a sense. No one would put a cinema ad in a D6 frame,
Yeah.
and no one will put a poster ad in your local Odeon. Um, the different media do different jobs, and they both do those jobs well. It's just
Yeah.
you have to understand, if you're a round-shaped company going into a round-shaped hole or a square-shaped company going to a square-shaped hole. That's where the
Okay.
attention data can be really useful.
Think I can answer the next question because I think you've said it. Is the radio-related research publicly available? And it is, and it's on. I assume it's on the links that will be in the article. That will be in AdWorld.
Yes, or and I don't know what the guys at AdWorld will do, but
It'll
Kieran,
be on
you've
my
certainly got
website.
that, and please feel free to share it.
Yeah. Well, beyond the article will also appear on the Radio Centre Ireland website tomorrow, and the links will be on that. I think you've kind of answered this one already, but I'll ask it, how does radio ad affect seconds of attention generated? If 1,000 radio ads generate 10,000 seconds of attention, does it make sense to make all ads 10 seconds long?
Well, that's an interesting thing. So, uh, uh, and it becomes, and this is where the creative is really, really important. Um, on your average, if it's okay, because the radio data is there's some assumptions in there and some inferences, and it's harder for me to speak really conclusively about that. But say, let's talk about TV, which is something we all understand and get. Your average 30-second TV ad will get, say, 12 seconds of actual attention. And 18 seconds, people will be looking at their phone or wondering, doing what everyone does. But it doesn't mean that they look for 12 seconds, they go, right, that's up, and then they look up. What people do is that they sometimes they look and sometimes they're not, sometimes they're listening and I think it raises a really interesting question for us, which is perhaps we should just admit that sometimes people are a bit distracted.
Yeah.
And that's why, for instance, once it's probably worth serving 4 or 5 ads to them because if you listen to the first bit, you might not listen to the second, and if you miss the beginning, you might not listen to the end, and so give people a chance to be exposed to the ad again and again. I know that we work in advertising, get bored when we hear the same ad again and again, but then again, we're paid to be interested in ads. Most other people aren't. I think probably a bit of frequency is a good thing, not a bad thing. Um, the second thing, though, is how do I design ads so that people will actually look up and pay attention? And this, I think we're pretty good as an industry at making TV ads. We know how to tell stories there. The real issue is on social media because and here I really do think that we can uh, 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 because there's greater flexibility there, we can think about, do we really want to buy a 15-second ad? Would anyone actually watch to the end? That is a thing. So you can buy different media like that. And then if you're going to buy a 6-second ad, which is what Facebook and Meta recommend, how do you design an ad to work in 6 seconds that really, really works rather than getting a TV ad and cutting it down? Because I think that this is what's I think that the question is a really wise one, which is I don't think we should assume that we're really talking about a proportion of the ad that gets looked at. So if you buy a 6-second ad, people might only look at 2 seconds, just as if they buy 30 seconds, they might look at 10. I think that's the real question then becomes, how do I get people to engage for a greater proportion of my ad? And that's really, really down to understanding the media, understanding that radio ads work in a different way to TV ads, and TV ads work in a different way to print ads and stuff. That's one thing. But then really understanding the creative. And the thing that we're spending most of our time on is understanding the visual triggers that make people stop and stare at Facebook ads. Because people don't have to endure those things. You can script. So what is it that can be most thumb stopping when it comes to what is it that gets people to go from 2 or 3 seconds to 5 to 8 seconds?
Okay. Just a related question, actually, I know we're just kind of just nearly there time-wise, is do different campaign objectives need different levels of attention?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think this is really, really important to say. Sometimes all you want to do is remind people that McDonald's exists or that Coca-Cola is a thing. And how much attention do you need for that? They're big, famous brands. They've got what Byron Sharp calls distinctive brand assets. You can get the job done in 1 or 2 seconds. And the most efficient way of buying attention to achieve that objective might be to go and buy lots of posters, lots of Facebook ads to get it done like that. Other times, you really want to say that all the beef in McDonald's restaurants in Ireland is from the island of Ireland, say, and that's a much more complicated message, but it's really powerful if people pay attention to it. And so, if you've got a different and more complicated message, perhaps what you might want to do is start putting your money into radio or into TV where you can tell that more complicated story. And so it'll affect the creative you use, but also the media you use. And so there are very definitely different attention strategies that you should employ to based on who's doing the talking, how famous they are, or how well known they are, and what you want to say. And so definitely, I think it's a
Okay.
that understanding the right level of attention to deliver the right results for you is the most important question.
Sorry to all the attendees, I won't be able to ask all. You've created so much content of questions, Mike. I won't be able to ask all of the questions, but I just want to ask one specific one.
Well, before you go,
Goes,
Kieran, I'm very happy to answer these things in email. So if
yeah,
people want to email me, we can go all day.
perfect. And I will send your email to all the attendees as well. But just a question, because you talked about ethics towards the end. So there's one question that specifically is about that. So how do you think media owners producing high quality content can go and convince planners to divert spend away from the likes of Facebook and Google, you have user generated content, which may be attractive cost wise, but but may not perform as expected. So this is a media
Well,
owner.
I think the first thing, guys, is that the data I presented today um, should give you solace that in actual fact the story is an easy one. High quality journalism, high quality content delivers lots and lots of attention to the show or to the article, and because there's lots of attention to the show or to the article, so there's lots of attention to the advertising. So the story is already looking good. Use this data to show that you can do well by doing good. There is a strong amoral economic imperative to invest in TV and radio and cinema and the Irish Times and things like that. That's the first thing to say. The economics are on your side. Only when the economics change can you start talking about the sort of a broader attention ecosystem and the need to support democracy and creativity. But at the moment, I don't think you need to make that argument. I think the data is suggesting that it's the it's the high quality creators that are creating the high quality attention. Please use this data to help make that argument.
Brilliant. Just to say that Sounding Out 2025 is back again, and it's on October the 16th in the Round Room at the Mansion House again. That's an in-person event, and Mike will be presenting at that as well. So we'll be able to further continue these conversations and debates. Can ask more questions in person later on in the year. But I thank everybody for attending. Thank everybody for all the questions. Huge amount of interest, huge amount of questions. Apologize we couldn't get through them all. But we'll see you all at the next Radio Centre Ireland webinar. Have a wonderful day, and thank you all very much. And Mike, thank you for
Thank
fantastic
you.
presentation, very stimulating, and lots of Irish influence content as well, which was fantastic.
Absolutely.
Really appreciate it. And goodbye to everybody. Thank you all.